whenever you see a therapist who has a specialty, it's like, it's probably something that they've gone through, or probably
it's actually the same when you have someone with a very specifically themed podcast.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
people might be curious to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tracy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I like to start off every episode with gratitude. And for today's gratitude, the field of psychedelics and psychedelic healing is something that I think a lot of people are curious about. And you are somebody who has experience on both sides of that equation. You have been both a facilitator of psychedelic healing and a participant in those sessions.
Patient and provider, yeah.
And I wanted to say thank you for bringing those insights to the podcast today.
You're welcome. I hope I meet your expectations.
I'm sure you will. I wanted to start off by asking you about just in general being a therapist. How long have you been a therapist for?
I've been a psychologist since, licensed, officially fully licensed since like 2015 or 2016, I think. I graduated with my PhD in 2014, so it takes a little bit of time to get fully licensed. But
I see. And what made you want to be a therapist?
Good question. I didn't really. I went to college with the intention of being a physical therapist. I guess another type of therapist. And I had actually guaranteed admission to PT school if I stayed on the path that was laid out for me. And part of that path was volunteering in various physical therapy settings. So like rehab centers, sports medicine clinics, hospital floors, things like that. And looking back, I'm really grateful. At the time, it was annoying because I didn't have a car and I had to like figure out how to get to all these places, and I was volunteering. But I'm grateful for that because it helped me realize I did not want to be a physical therapist.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool that we have that there are PTs out there who probably love what they do. But for me, when I was shadowing those PTs, I just was not into it. So then I decided, so I was a biology major, and all my friends were like pre-health, nerds that were all like pre-PT, pre-pharm, pre-dent, pre-med, those kids.
Yeah.
And then I just decided, okay, I don't want to do that anymore, but I really like these psychology classes that I'm taking. I didn't know, prior to going to college, I didn't know what psychology was. I'd never been to therapy. I didn't know. Yeah, I knew nothing, but I knew I liked these classes, and it all just kind of made sense to me and felt really intuitive. So I switched majors, and then I asked my professors and TAs, like, well, what does someone do with a psychology degree? Like, I don't know. And they were like, oh, you go to grad school. And I was like, okay, all right, sounds good. So I applied to graduate programs and got into UT's program. Was actually on the wait list initially, and then was accepted. And I really just wanted to live in Austin more than anything. So I kind of like applied to schools based on location.
Yeah.
And was only willing to move to cities that I liked. So this was my top choice. And then, 7 years later, I got my degree, and turns out I enjoy talking to people and getting to know them and doing one-on-one therapy. A lot of people graduate from a psychology program and don't do any clinical work.
Yeah.
They might work in academia, or they might do, just research, teach, those kinds of things. I was always more drawn, or once we started doing it in school in our second year, I realized I liked that way more than the research side of things. So it all kind of worked out, but yeah, I didn't, it wasn't like I was 5 years old and said, I want to be a therapist.
Right.
Or it wasn't like people told me, oh, you're such a good listener, you should be a therapist. It was nothing like that. I really came in from the science side of things.
Yeah. And even after switching major, it still wasn't natural that the conclusion would be that you'd become a therapist.
Right. It was just like, oh, I like these classes more than, chemistry. So I guess I'll do this.
Yeah.
I think I've always had, fortunately, as someone who has not gone through big T trauma or childhood trauma, I did have this just inner knowing of like, okay, whatever I do, it's probably going to work out. There wasn't anything in my head that said, oh no, no, you need to keep following that physical therapy path. That's the secure path.
Yeah.
That's you're going to make a decent salary, blah, blah, blah. Like that's the safe choice. There was nothing in me that held me back in that way.
In terms of the modalities that you practice, what are the focuses of your work?
Well, those are two different questions, I guess. Modalities to me means like, what are the approaches that I use?
Yeah.
And then focus would be like, what are the types of clients that I like to work with?
Okay.
So I'll answer that one first. I think that's easier. I really like to work with, surprise, surprise, people like me. Whenever you see a therapist who has a specialty, it's like, it's probably something that they've gone through, or probably
it's actually the same when you have someone with a very specifically themed podcast.
Yeah.
People might be curious to know.
Yeah, exactly. It's true in doctoral programs. Like when you do your dissertation, a lot of times they call it me search instead of research. But anyways, so I like working with anxiety. I like working with perfectionism. I like working with women and non-binary individuals. What else do I do? I like identity explorations, spiritual explorations. I think those are my things.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to do more addiction. I used to do more depression, which I do not identify with. And so it really wasn't a good fit for me in terms of those clients. It always kind of felt like I was going upstream.
Yeah. Was it hard to relate or connect to those people without that?
Yeah, I mean, it still is. Of course, like depression is very common. So I'm not, I definitely work with clients who have depression, but it is harder for me, I guess in a way. Yeah, it is a little harder for me to empathize with that because I personally haven't gotten through it.
Yeah.
We can maybe get to this, but in one of my ayahuasca ceremonies, several of them actually, Aya did gift me with some experiences of depression and really getting to feel that and really feel that despair.
When you say experiences, you mean outside of yourself?
No, I mean like within the ceremony, like within the ceremony, there were like moments, very memorable times where she kind of put me into a depressed state.
Yeah, I guess that's what I mean is like it wasn't a depression about something specific in your life. It was gifting you the experience of depression.
The despair, and even the like, oh, okay, I can understand, suicide.
Yeah.
If this was my constant state.
Yeah.
So how do we get on that? Yes, I do work with people with depression, but I don't put it as one of my specialties anymore because, I just think there's better therapists out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, can work with that. Same with addiction.
And then in terms of modalities?
Yeah, so I know you've already had a therapist on the podcast, but I work with similar modalities to that. We call them experiential modalities. So IFS, or internal family systems, the somatic experiencing. And I'm not like officially certified in any of these modalities. That's a whole other rant I could have on whether or not these certifications really matter or worth it. But I do draw upon IFS techniques, somatic techniques, emotion-focused techniques, which is also those. I bring in my yoga background, my Buddhist background. So I like to bring in spirituality as it applies. I'm trained in yoga nidra, which is a type of meditation. So I might kind of bring that in with my clients. Certainly before a psychedelic session, I kind of want to offer them some of those techniques so that when they're in the psychedelic space, they can maybe use those techniques
Yeah.
to soothe their own nervous system, because it's a very anxiety inducing experience for most people,
Yeah.
I would say. In fact, if you're not a little scared going into a psychedelic experience, like that might be a red flag.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
if you're, yeah, that's probably more recreational use, if you're not at all afraid.
Yeah.
But I think if you have reverence for the medicine, or if you have, respect and reverence for the process, you're going to be a little like, what's
Yeah.
going to happen? Like a little worried, maybe a lot worried.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is definitely my experience. I think when I did my first session, I had been meditating for over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And going in the week leading up to it, I had severe anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
And especially in my dreams leading up to it,
Yes.
severe anxiety. And
Yes.
even that morning,
Yes.
and then in the
Woo!
first hour while the medicine is waiting to work.
Oh, that, yeah.
But it has persisted throughout the following 6 sessions. Every time in the lead up and on the morning of, like you said, I think
Yeah.
some amount of anxiety and cautiousness around the experience is
Yeah.
definitely warranted.
Every retreat I've ever signed up for, I almost bail on it.
Yeah.
Especially, and to me now I know, okay, that's the medicine working actually. That anxiety I'm feeling, I'm releasing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, every time I've signed up for something, some type of ceremony or retreat, I'm like, maybe, you know what? I don't need this. Like my ego will go, you're good. You can just meditate, Tracy.
Yeah.
You don't need to do all this. And I'll come up with all these reasons like, this is crazy. Why am I going down to Peru? Like, but it's really just my anxiety talking. And then, yes, oh my gosh. That's the most anxiety I've ever felt, is probably the hour or two leading up to an ayahuasca ceremony. At least at the center that I go to, the ceremony starts really late at night, like 10 o'clock. So you have a long time in the dark by yourself to just kind of wait there. And
Yeah, I'm sure you can psych yourself out very
you
easily.
could yeah, especially if you're kind of an analytical, thinky person. So yoga nidra is extremely helpful as a practice to do, I would say, right before a session or ceremony, whatever you'd like to call it. Just to calm yourself, remind yourself that everything's okay, remind yourself that you have everything you need actually for this experience, and that help is always there.
Yeah.
You're never really alone. At least those are things I tell myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is something that I think I will want to come back to later on in this conversation, is that decision between listening to your intuition and doing the thing that you maybe need to do. But there are some other parts of the conversation I do want to have first. So the next question is, how long have you been doing ketamine therapy?
So I started that in 2018. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or maybe divine intervention, depending on your belief system there. But I officed with some folks in town. Actually, they were the first people in Texas to offer ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And it's a psychiatrist and social worker, and their behavioral health clinic is called Roots Behavioral Health. And so I did a training with them that was experiential, meaning we got to do, all the therapists who signed up, we did 2 ketamine training sessions as part of that. And they call them training sessions because they're not really meant to be for our own therapy, right? You're kind of paired up with another therapist, and at least the way it was structured for us was in the morning, one of you went, one of you consumed the ketamine and had your experience, and your partner was there to kind of help you out, but not really get into any kind of deep therapy. And then in the afternoon, you swapped, and then the other person became the facilitator and the other person became the client.
Yeah.
And we did that twice using 2 different methods for ingesting ketamine. And then since then, I've done other ketamine training sessions as well. Again, really more for my trying to get an understanding of the medicine and maybe form a relationship with it. I know that sounds a little woo woo, but ketamine is such a strange, like it is just very, very strange. And it's not like psilocybin, it's not like MDMA, it's not like ayahuasca. It is just its own thing. So it's
Yeah.
essential to kind of have gone in and like, oh, okay, here I can play with this here. Or I was trying to look for the spirit of ketamine. I didn't find it.
Yeah. That seems like a good place to start, though. What is
Yeah.
ketamine?
Well, it's a drug. It's a very safe anesthetic. It's been used, I want to say, since the 70s. But it's a really interesting medicine. So we know at those very high doses, it acts as an anesthetic, and every ambulance truck you see go by has ketamine on their truck.
Yeah.
People also think of it as a horse tranquilizer, right? That's the common kind of stereotype out there. So it's also used in veterinary practices. But that's at really high doses. At the lower doses, so under 100 milligrams, it acts as a stimulant initially, and then it kind of acts as a psychedelic. It's a very interesting medicine. Instead of the classic psychedelics that go through serotonin, or their serotonin pathways, ketamine goes through glutamate. And all of this, I mean, we're still learning about it as well. It's an emerging treatment. So there's so much more to learn here.
Yeah.
It's also shorter acting than those classic psychedelics. A ketamine experience could last, maybe 20 minutes to 50 minutes. Just kind of depends on the person's metabolism. Or if they're doing an IV, then that's a very set, 45 minutes.
Okay.
But if you're doing it via IM, intramuscular shot, then the body, which I prefer, the body decides how long you're kind of in that ketamine state, and then when you come out of it.
Yeah.
So, but it's really nice because it already kind of fits with our paradigm of therapy because it's so short acting. That way we're able to do 2-hour sessions. So you have time to prepare, calm yourself, set your intentions, kind of get in the right headspace. Then you have your ketamine experience. And then we have about an hour or so afterwards to kind of reorient and land. And after that session, I mean, you're not able to drive, but you're pretty lucid.
Yeah.
I mean, you're able to walk, you're able to talk, you're able to see. So ketamine is a really, really great medicine for clinics that already exist that are trying to add in another form of treatment.
Yeah. What is the legal status currently of ketamine?
Yeah, so it's legal, as I said, like it's been used, medical use for a really long time. It's currently for psychiatry, it's considered off-label use, but that doesn't mean illegal. So it's perfectly legal. I forget what kind of classification it's in, but of course, any clinic that has ketamine there, there's all kinds of protocols and things that go along with having ketamine on site.
Yeah.
Just like with any other drug you might have.
Yeah. Can you explain off-label?
So off-label means when the FDA approved use of a certain drug, they didn't necessarily know at the time, or they couldn't have known, oh, hey, you can also use it for this. So I've used the example of Botox being used for TMJ.
Right.
Which is, I do that actually for my jaw tension. And it's a great treatment, very effective, but technically that is off-label use.
Yeah. Okay. And then if somebody were about to embark on their first ketamine experience, what can they expect from that experience?
Yeah, I get that question all the time. You want to know. And I love, it's sort of delicious to me. I love saying to them, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be like. I could share anecdotes of other patients and what they've experienced. I can tell you my experience, but every person is so different. Just like, every person has their own psychology, their own background, their own memories, their own coping skills. So every experience is completely different. Um, yeah. And also depends on what your intention is. Like my intention going into ketamine was, okay, I'm trying to understand this medicine, right? I want to kind of get a feel for the experience. I wasn't going in trying to work on my own trauma or, any kind of specific thing from my past or my autobiographical memory.
Yeah.
Which is actually true for all my psychedelic use. I've gone in more for curiosity and spiritual development or self-growth than a specific thing from my past that I'm trying to work through.
Yeah.
So the experience, yeah, it just varies. It also varies by dose. Some people it's a dissociative. So some people fully dissociate, which means they no longer hear my voice. They no longer hear the music. They are gone. They're completely in a different place. And I've experienced that myself during one of my training sessions. And for me personally, I didn't find that very helpful or therapeutic.
Yeah.
So I try to encourage my clients, okay, we don't need to get to that high dose. And again, every body is different, but whatever that high dose means for you, where you fully dissociate, I don't think that's really necessary for treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the common experiences people do have, though?
Yeah, so common experiences, the way we do it is similar to the MAPS protocol, where the person is either lying down or they're in like a recliner, so very comfortable. They have an eye mask on, and then I'm playing one of my playlists, which are all available on Spotify for anyone. And it's all like kind of like ambient yoga type music. And going in, it takes about with the IV, takes about 5 to 10 minutes to hit, maybe 6 minutes ish. With the IM, it takes about 3 minutes or less. And people start to feel like often kind of like a sinking down, very relaxed, that kind of heaviness at the same time. And I think this is true of most psychedelics. Your perception of your body is changing. So as you're sinking down and feeling heavy, maybe you also feel kind of a stretch and feel lighter, right? Which is such a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and a lot of this is so ineffable, right? It's very hard. It's very hard to describe, and you sound kind of crazy when you do. But so they might experience that kind of a relaxation, all that anxiety that they were feeling. All of a sudden, they're like, oh, okay, like, all right, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. With ketamine in particular, because it does have that stimulant effect, people might feel their heart racing a little bit. And that's also why we advise, not doing caffeine. Same, I think, with any psychedelic.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to mix caffeine, or definitely not like your ADHD medication with a psychedelic. So people might experience their heart racing. But to me, it's like, okay, that's just the door opening. You're going into a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And then people might, they can kind of like groove to the music, and they might start to see visuals of like some kind of music video playing in their head. Or they might, if it's something we've been talking about in therapy. So I should back up and say, when I do ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, that's not the first time I've met that patient.
Yeah.
We've been working together, ideally years, before embarking on this very special type of treatment. At a minimum, a couple months together, because it just takes time to really build that trust, right? They really have to trust me. You're in your most vulnerable state, right? You've taken a drug, you're completely vulnerable. So you really want to trust your facilitator, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so, it might be something in particular that we've been talking about in therapy that they might start to see or shift, a figure, mom, dad, somebody in their life that they kind of can see. Or there's a lot of sort of like a dream. There's a lot of symbolism that at the time it might be very clear to them and make a lot of sense. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. It might be after the fact when we're processing and integrating the experience that it's like, oh, so that mountain, what do you think that could mean? Or when you had that suitcase, what do you think that could mean?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Does memory recall play a part in this, or is it all metaphor or symbolism? Like,
Memory recall.
like, do you process actual past events, or is it mostly?
To me, I don't think it's that direct.
Okay.
Because we're going into a non-ordinary state of consciousness. So parts of and I'm not a neuroscientist, forgive me, but parts of the brain are talking to each other that don't normally talk to each other. So just like in a dream where things are stretched and strange and kind of upside down, chaotic chaotic, that's probably how it's going to be. So it's not going to be this clear, like you're just playing a video on your phone.
Yeah.
It can be scary at times. I have had patients who have seen kind of scary imagery, and I have certainly seen a lot of scary imagery and very like grotesque, morbid imagery in my own work. And that's a whole thing on like, how do you I take kind of a Buddhist approach to that, which is like welcoming all that arises as a messenger. But it's really hard when you're seeing disturbing imagery.
Yeah.
Right? How do you welcome that in? It can happen when you're meditating too, right?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know if that really answered your question. It varies there. I'd say with ketamine, there is a point that a lot of my patients do experience, which is a bliss state, particularly clients who are severely depressed. And that is one of the main off-label uses of ketamine is treatment-resistant depression.
Yeah.
So people who have tried multiple medications, they've tried talk therapy, they've tried group therapy, self-help books, all kinds of things, and nothing has lifted that depression. Ketamine might be the only time that they're actually able to experience that kind of euphoria or bliss state. And that can be really, really nice, just to remind people that, at least I believe, we all have access to that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a question I did want to ask is what kind of issues are best treated by ketamine?
Yeah. So treatment-resistant depression is the big one right now. PTSD, addiction. I think anxiety doesn't get enough attention. I guess, as you can see, that's sort of a personal passion of mine. But I think any type of psychedelic, ketamine being the one that's legal right now in Texas, you just by signing up for that type of treatment, like you are working on your anxiety, right? Because it takes a lot of courage, a lot of fortitude to say, yep, I'm willing to go into this extraordinary state of consciousness. And I have no idea what it's going to be like. Like, there's nothing scarier. Existentially, there's nothing scarier than like saying goodbye to this reality and going someplace, going into the upside down.
Yeah.
Like, whew. So to me, I think it works on anxiety. And then you can always, I have many clients who can always look back on those ketamine experiences when they, in regular life, they're noticing a lot of worry, a lot of nervous energy. They can think back to that ketamine session we had and they're like, you know what? I did that. I was panicking and freaking out, but I stayed with myself. I found that internal resource and I got through it. And actually I found more of a bliss state on the other side once I got through that fear. So now they can always draw upon that experience, right? And
they have that frame of reference.
Yeah, they have that. And like no one can take that away from them. They did that. And I think that's hard for people to understand who haven't been confronted with that, because it's, again, I think it's just hard to understand. You're being confronted with letting go and surrendering everything you know.
Yeah.
And not just knowledge like Wikipedia, but everything you know to be true in terms of just reality, physics, like basic stuff.
Yeah, things we take for granted in everyday life.
Yeah, things we take for granted in everyday life. This kind of linear or quadratic, really, this kind of quadratic reality that we live in. Right. You give that up and you go into this hyperbolic state. I mean, even just kind of thinking about it now, I'm like, whew,
Yeah.
No thanks. I'm good. I'm good right here.
Yeah. I had also heard that suicidality is also
Yeah.
very effectively
So,
treated.
right. Which is, can be associated with depression and
Right.
PTSD and I guess everything really. But yeah, there's some research. Your listeners could look it up if they want to. But there are some studies that even just one session of ketamine offers immediate relief in terms of that suicidality. We don't have anything like that. Like I've worked in inpatient settings, so hospital settings where people are coming in and are in a really, really bad state. It's usually like the worst day of their life. If you're ending up in the psych ER, it's not your best day.
Yeah.
And then if it's so bad that then you get moved to the inpatient unit, not good. And there's nothing right now in the arsenal of psychiatry that can provide immediate relief for suicidal thinking other than ketamine. So it's really cool. And I'm not a psychiatrist, but there is a lot of controversy, or it's becoming less now as there's more and more evidence to support ketamine. But initially, there was a lot of pushback from more traditional psychiatry that they want to continue to use the medications that they have, and some people were not as open to this type of treatment.
Do you have a theory as to why that was?
Because again, it's just like what we were saying about having to give up your definition of reality.
Right.
Because if you say, hey, there's something to this, then you have to it's that cognitive dissonance, right? You have to then fold that into your conception of like, oh, it turns out I don't know everything. There's a lot of mystery to the universe.
Yeah.
And maybe there are things that I don't understand that can help people.
Yeah.
A lot of psychiatrists don't want to do that.
Do you think there's any part of that there's like a big pharma element to it that they've been so
Sure.
established for so long?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, psychologists too, right? Who don't prescribe. So psychologists only in a few states can psychologists prescribe medication. Usually it's states where there aren't enough psychiatrists around. But psychologists too, like we don't prescribe, and there's a lot of pushback in psychology around these treatments. Again, it's becoming less and less with, Michael Pollan's book and like a billion Netflix documentaries. And I mean, it's just like, I think we've crossed the tipping point.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is resistance. Yeah, that's the word. There's resistance to it. And it's the exact same resistance that I've experienced in some patients who thought maybe they wanted to do this. And we actually get into the room and then they completely resist the entire experience. And look, I've done that on ayahuasca many times.
Yeah.
Just completely resisted. And it's like, no, thank you. But it's like, you're just going to suffer. And the really neat thing about psychedelic therapy too is you can't get out of it. It's like, you can just resist for the next 4 hours. Or in the case of ketamine, the next 30 minutes. And you'll be miserable. Or you can, maybe experiment with what would it be like to say, okay, I'm curious. Why is this imagery coming up?
Yeah.
Why am I feeling this in my body? What's happening? Can you allow that to be? Oh, I didn't think, I really wanted a ceremony where we're just going to be in the heaven realms and I was going to be shown, the secrets of the universe and get to fly around. Instead, I'm in the hell realm and there's cockroaches everywhere.
Yeah.
This isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I wanted. Right? So you just have to learn how to kind of accept that.
Right. Surrendering to the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to drill down a little bit more into the drug-resistant depression.
Treatment-resistant depression, yeah.
With regards to ketamine, what does that look like in terms of the lived experience for the person afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
Is it something where the depression completely goes away for the person? Is this something that they have to sustain in terms of ketamine
Right.
treatment?
Yeah. Folks always want to know that. Again, it really depends on the person, depends on the severity of the depression. I always say with talk therapy as well, it's like, okay, well, we're not going to undo in, 50 minutes together, we're not going to undo something that's been going on for 15 years.
Right.
Like, it's going to take a little time. You have to have a little patience. That being said, ketamine is, I think, a very rapid treatment. Most people or the research looks at maybe a series of 8 sessions, so twice a week for 4 weeks. I don't know how they came up with that, but that's often the protocol that's studied in research. My clients, not a lot of people can do that, like financially, as well as taking off work for that amount of time. That's a big commitment. So a lot of my clients have done, say, 6 sessions in 6 weeks, something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm very flexible because I'm also not conducting a research study. I'm working with actual human beings with responsibilities and children and jobs. So I'm very flexible, but ideally you'd have those sessions, kind of as close together over a condensed amount of time, right? And then you just kind of see where you're at. So again, it depends on the person. The clinic that I've worked with, they do use some scales to actually get to kind of quantify the depression and the anxiety.
Right.
So they have some kind of measurement here. As a psychologist, we do assessment all the time, and I'm kind of like, it's a self-report. It's not really, I don't know. I don't think it's the most accurate.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of people do feel a remarkable, like significant improvement after those 6 to 8 sessions.
Yeah.
Which is huge, and that is like, if you've been suffering with depression your whole life, investing a couple $1,000s in ketamine treatment, I mean, that's the rest of your life, right? So to me, it's worth every penny. And then after that, again, depends on the person and their situation, but a lot of people continue with what they call right now maintenance sessions, which might be once every 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay. In terms of that 6 sessions in 6 weeks, is that a uniform once a week? Is it front loaded? How does that usually work?
What do
So,
you
so
mean by
like,
front loaded?
might you do like 3 sessions in the first week and then,
Oh, hmm,
uh, one
that could
after
be an
1 week
interesting way to do
and
it.
yeah.
I don't know. um, hmm. Yeah, I suppose you could do it like that.
But in terms of the regular protocol right now, it's uniform.
Again, well, again, with my clients, they're probably the exception because I only work with people who I've been working with for a long time. And so we can come up with a schedule together. And we might also have talk therapy sessions in between the ketamine sessions.
Yeah.
Or back when I was teaching yoga nidra, I would encourage them to, take a meditation class in between. Right. So there's something kind of in between those ketamine sessions. But at like one of the infusion clinics in town, they will probably say, okay, here's what we recommend. They keep it very structured. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then in terms of recovery from a single session, when
Mm-hmm.
can the person expect to be able to drive again,
Oh, yeah.
have full cognitive function?
Yeah, a few hours. Like
Okay.
you're pretty good. Yeah, the driving thing is like, I always say it's kind of like after ketamine, people they're kind of drunk, they're,
Impaired.
well, I mean, yeah, impaired, I guess. I was going to say uninhibited, loopy. To me, it's pretty fun actually. Like getting to work with people who are in that state. I try to bring a sense of humor to it. It's like, okay, well, how do the lights feel to you? Because you just had this eye shade on, and also ketamine makes you really sensitive to light, as does ayahuasca. Um, and so all of a sudden you're looking at fluorescent lights, and it can be like, you're like a vampire.
Right.
People, if they're getting a ride home via Uber, I suggest maybe taking some ginger or something like that because you could feel a little nauseous. Or even if it's your partner driving you, you can still feel a little nauseous maybe
Yeah.
on your ride home. But yeah, you're pretty good to go. I mean, yeah, I think you're good to go. I've always recovered pretty fast, and again, for me, since I'm not doing it for treatment-resistant depression, I'm already kind of coming in with a pretty good mood in terms of my baseline. So after my ketamine training sessions, I felt wonderful. I felt really on top of the world, you know? Um, some people feel really tired.
Yeah.
I should say that also depends, since ketamine is being done so safely and in a medical environment, they are able to offer other medications to people. So they commonly offer Zofran, which is an anti-nausea medicine, which is so great, that people can take that. Whereas if you're doing another type of underground ceremony, you're probably not going to have access to those medicines that can maybe help with symptoms. On the other hand, though, I think the Zofran does make people tired.
Right.
So I noticed, and some people argue with me on this, but I've noticed in my patients that the ones who take the Zofran, they don't have that increased energy at the end of the ketamine session versus if they just kind of did the pure ketamine experience.
Right.
People can debate that. And if you go to an infusion clinic, they can put all kinds of other stuff in that IV bag for you. I mean, not like random things, but things that I don't know about, that maybe an anesthesiologist would know about.
Yeah.
To kind of help with the side effects.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the risk factors that people should be aware of, what are the risks of ketamine?
So talk to a medical person about that. I'm a PhD, not an MD, so there's only so much I can, talk about. But I think the big one is if you're on a certain type of medication that is contraindicated with ketamine. There's certain like mood stabilizers. If you have any kind of heart issues, the ketamine is going to raise your heart rate and raise your blood pressure. So if that's a concern for you, this probably isn't the treatment. Let's see what else. I think I'm better at knowing maybe the psychological, what did you call it?
Risk factors?
Yeah, risk factors than maybe the medical ones. Psychologically speaking, I would say rigidity is a huge one.
What does that mean in this
rigidity,
context?
so someone who's very rigid, which I grew up in a very rigid household, and I used to be a lot more rigid. I think kind of before I discovered cannabis, honestly.
Okay.
But rigidity is having very fixed expectations, seeing things in very black or white manner, wanting things to go according to plan. Controlling,
right,
might be another way to say it.
Yeah.
So someone with a more rigid or controlling personality, it's like, this isn't gonna be for you. Maybe, maybe it could break down those defenses, but I try to screen those people out.
Yeah.
And I think so does the clinic that I work with, because they're just not going to have good outcomes.
Yeah. What should people consider before deciding to use ketamine?
Mm-hmm. Well, cost first, right? The clinic that I work with, it is covered by insurance, which is awesome. So that's very cost effective for people. But the infusion clinics in town, most of them do not take insurance. So it's a few $1,000 investment. That's probably the biggest barrier for people. I think one a lot of people don't think about, and this goes for ketamine, this goes for ayahuasca, this goes for maybe a Vipassana retreat, like anything you're going to do that could shift your perspective of reality, I would consider your support system. Do you have an adequate support system to come back to? Because doing these types of treatments, going into an extraordinary state of consciousness, hopefully it's going to change you.
Yeah.
right? That's the goal. Hopefully, it's going to change you. And that can be very disorienting for people, right? Hopefully, you have a therapist to talk to about this. You can be really open with them as you're noticing these changes. Maybe your values start to shift. Maybe you realize you're hanging out with the wrong people. Maybe you realize you hate your job, right? That's very common.
Yeah.
So I would say, as a word of caution, before you embark on any treatment like this, feeling like you have a community, Sangha, which is a spiritual community, or at the very least, a therapist to help walk you through this process of healing and transformation.
You have mentioned the word integration and now talking about a support network. What is integration as it relates to psychedelic healing?
So integration is learning to trust yourself, trust your intuition, your internal knowing. I'll try to make that less abstract. Maybe there were so for example, I already brought up, like, for me, moments during ayahuasca of really going into a very dark place. And I'm like, part of me is, narrating the experiences it's happening. Like, I don't have depression. Like, what is this darkness? Why is this happening to me? And then only after the fact realizing, oh, well, first of all, I've absorbed a ton of that from my clients. Like, a ton of that has been living inside of me that I've just been holding for people, which is not healthy, not a good practice for the therapists out there. But we do end up unconsciously holding a lot of our clients' trauma, unresolved, unprocessed trauma, especially, that we can feel, but they aren't ready to really get into.
Yeah.
Whew. Yeah. So that stuff just kind of starts to live inside of me. And ayahuasca helps me clear it out. But in the moment, like the actual moment of that ceremony, so, 1 a.m. in the middle of the jungle, when I'm going through it, I'm like confused. I'm crying, I'm emoting. I'm like self-pitying, all those kinds of things. It's only in the integration where I'm able to make sense of that and go, oh, that's why. Yes, yes, yes. I was releasing a lot of that stuff. And it's also building empathy for my work with clients and just human beings, humanity. All right, so that's integration. I do a lot of my integration on my own. For where I'm at, that works for me. I'm able to journal and make sense of it myself. I also use other medicines in a way to help me integrate, like cannabis, or other things that can help me actually make sense of a big ayahuasca experience. You could use prayer, yoga practice, talk therapy,
meditation,
group therapy.
Yeah. Okay.
Dance. Music, dance, like those are big ones.
Is there something that you would change about the current system as it relates to ketamine therapy?
I was gonna say legalize drugs. Yeah, definitely change that.
That too.
Yeah, it would end prohibition. Absolutely. One thing I would change, I guess, thinking of MAPS. So my best experiences personally with psychedelics have been the more kind of shamanic style, or the more shamanic tradition, which means a lot of things. But one clear difference is that in the shamanic tradition, the facilitator is also using the medicine.
Right.
The facilitator, or the shaman, is taking that medicine so that they can kind of open that door themselves. And they're not taking it for their own purposes. They're taking it with the purpose of serving and helping. And so they're able to kind of see what's going on. And so part of me wishes, again, I understand the reasons, the ethical implications right now. We're just trying to get things legalized. So it's like it opens a whole can of worms if you think about the therapist also doing MDMA or doing psilocybin with the patient,
Right.
but to me, it's kind of essential, And you'd only want to go to a facilitator who has the maturity, right, to take that substance with the intention of serving, with the intention of helping and seeing, right? So you'd have to choose your provider wisely in that case.
Yeah.
Right now, as it stands, of course, the therapists, the medical providers are not on ketamine at all. So that might be something. I'm just curious about that.
So switching gears very slightly, I did want to talk to you about ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And to start off in the same place as we did with ketamine, what is ayahuasca for people who are not familiar with that medicine?
Well, ayahuasca is a vine that grows in the Amazon. When it's brewed into a tea with chacruna, which is like a little bush tree, when those two plants are combined and they're brewed in this like cauldron over a open fire for like 12 hours, eventually it boils down into what we commonly call ayahuasca. And it's basically a very disgusting tea, the most disgusting thing you've ever had in your life. Even just, I just thought of it. I'm like, it's like it never leaves you.
Yeah.
That sense memory of the taste of ayahuasca. It's real bad. Yeah, it's funny too, because first timers, people who it's their first time drinking, the next day they're usually like, oh, really? The taste wasn't that bad. And I'm like, okay, let's see how you feel in 2 weeks. And then after a few more ceremonies, they're like, oh my God. Like it just gets worse over time.
Yeah.
Anyway, what is ayahuasca? Yeah, so it's two plants brewed just with water, and then shamans kind of with prayers kind of infused into it in this very traditional manner, and it boils down into about a Coke bottle, 2-liter bottle, and then yes, it's it's you drink it, and it goes through. I don't know. Do you want me to go on more?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, I'm also not, again, there's plenty of documentaries out there that you can, if you want to know about the history of ayahuasca. I am not a historian. So if you want to learn about the indigenous tribes and the people that have been drinking ayahuasca for thousands of years, the medicine men, medicine women, you can go look up one of those documentaries or books on the history of ayahuasca. As we know it today, it's the most powerful psychedelic on the planet.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your path to ayahuasca?
My path was through yoga. I signed up for a yoga retreat with one of my favorite yoga teachers. She was leading a retreat into the Peruvian Amazon, and we would be staying at this treehouse lodge place where you're actually staying in a treehouse, more or less, in the Amazon with suspension bridges connecting the tree houses. Really, really cool. I would love to go back there. And it was just a magical place where you get to learn all about the animals and the plants, the culture. Really cool experience. So I had signed up for that. And then the traveler that I am, I was like, okay, I'd like to add something else to this trip if I'm going all the way down there. It was only a week-long retreat. What else could I do in Peru? Obviously, there's Machu Picchu, but part of me sort of rebels against things that are popular. So it's stupid. But this kind of adolescent rebellion. I was like, I don't want to do the thing that everybody else does. I don't want to go to the sacred site. Revered by the world. I don't want to do that. So instead I looked at like, okay, what can you do in and around Iquitos, which is where we'd be flying into. And Iquitos is the home of ayahuasca, as it turns out. So that I had heard about ayahuasca, I think on like podcasts or something. Who knows? I don't know. It was just like in my brain. I was not a like avid I was not a psychonaut, a person who, purposefully takes psychedelics to like go in and explore different realms and explore consciousness. I was not that.
Yeah.
I had barely done really anything. But I don't know, something like I read it in the guidebook and I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll do that. And then I looked at this site that had a bunch of ayahuasca retreats and reviews. I found one that just called to me and I signed up.
Hmm.
So
Was this before or after you had started working in ketamine treatment?
before.
Wow. Okay.
hmm Yeah, I don't think I would have been as excited about ketamine if I hadn't done ayahuasca.
Yeah.
I know that to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did this a 10-day at the time. This place, it was kind of like choose your own adventure. They didn't really have a set retreat. Now it's either 1 week or 2 weeks. Doesn't matter. I did a 10-day retreat before the yoga retreat. And it was like, life changing. It was life changing. And I went down there really just curious. Again, I'm very privileged to not have something, dark in my past or something or addiction or something that I really was like, okay, I want to do ayahuasca to cure this.
Yeah.
I just knew, okay, this seems like an experience. I just wanted an experience, and I believe now in hindsight that she was calling to me because I was meant to break down my reliance on the thinking mind, my reliance on logic. She was trying to get me more into my heart, which is also what yoga was doing concurrently, you know? So I believe it was all meant to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I found ayahuasca.
How many sessions did you do in that 10-day trip?
So they call them ceremonies, and I don't remember. I'd have to look back at my journals. I keep extensive journals, which are just, it's insane to go back and read what I wrote because I write like pages and pages after every ceremony.
Yeah.
Like everything I can remember, everything that happened. So maybe I did like 5 or 6 ceremonies.
Wow. In 10
I'm
days?
not sure. Yeah.
Wow.
Something like that.
And roughly how many ceremonies have you done overall?
I've done over 30 because I've done 5 retreats. I've only ever done ayahuasca in Peru, in the Amazon. 4 retreats at the same place, and then 1 retreat I tried a different place to mix it up.
Yeah. Is it a good experience, a bad experience?
At that other one?
Yeah.
I wouldn't go back.
Okay.
I wouldn't go back. They moved to Costa Rica anyways. It wasn't for me.
Okay.
I liked the place I go to is called La Luna.
Yeah.
Del Amazonas. Highly recommend. It's just great.
Yeah, if people did want to find a ayahuasca experience in South America, how would they go about doing that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I recommend La Luna, but if you, for whatever reason, don't want to go there, you want to go somewhere a little more bougie, maybe, you could go to ayaadvisors.org, and it's basically the Yelp for ayahuasca retreats, and you can look up reviews. Also just get a feel for, look at the websites, follow them on, social media. I would say just kind of get a feel for it.
Yeah.
For me, my criteria is how many passengers are there going to be. Passengers is what they call participants. For me, when I'm under the influence of the medicine, when I'm drinking, my empathy is like 1,000 times. It is just. So if there's that place I went that I don't recommend, there were way too many people, I thought, for me. And that also they were giving out really high doses. So my empathy was just, I was getting pulled to that person. I was getting pulled to that person. I was completely distracted. And I do realize that's my own issue to work on. But also, I think that you can have a better experience.
Yeah.
So I like a small group, maybe 15 or less. Like the fewer the better in terms of people, other passengers there with you. And it also, like, you really bond with those people. They become your soul brothers and sisters, like your soul family very quickly. You've shared in this profound, you've gone into um other dimensions together. So like, yeah, you really bond very quickly.
And your energies are so open.
They're intertwined.
Yeah,
Oh my
in the
gosh,
same
they're
space,
very
yeah.
intertwined. So I also don't recommend going with a close friend or a
Interesting.
partner. People do all the time. I think that's very distracting. If you're
Yeah.
empathic, it's very distracting.
Yeah.
You
So
know, you'll
interesting.
probably be concerned about their experience. Some people, ayahuasca doesn't work with everyone. It's not the medicine for everyone. And I've seen many couples who go down there, and one part of the couple has this beautiful ceremony. I mean, just amazing visions, all these insights, like, wow. And then the partner felt nothing or just felt sick the whole time,
Yeah.
like physically sick. And you can just see them the next day at breakfast, like, woo, you know? So to me, I think it's better to go alone and just trust the place you're going and trust that you will find community there.
Yeah. So maybe a good next question is, what is the experience like being on ayahuasca?
Yeah, so I've heard many, many different experiences. All the really cool people I've met in my travels, everyone had completely different experiences, right? And some people, their experience is no experience, like they don't feel it. And it's like, huh, okay, well, nothing is something too. That's interesting. What might that mean?
Yeah.
You know? Oh, so you're going to have to work with disappointment. Usually that's what it means, right? Aya wants you to just kind of work through your disappointment and your expectations. She's kind of saying, you're not ready. Other people, yeah, go into the heavenly states and they're shown all this stuff and they come out with such clarity. The next morning, they're like, I know exactly what I need to do. And usually it's not something about, it's not greed based, you know, oh, this is my new business idea. This is what I'm going to sell or no, it's like more internally. Oh, this is what I'm about. Yes, I should go from here. At some point in my life, I need to go to India or I need to go here. You know, something like that. Some people have, you know, I've had really, really mixed experiences. And I had so much fear going into it that I would often have very scary experiences. Very scary experiences where I'm just like, I want this to end. And that's a common ayahuasca thing. It's like you haven't really done ayahuasca until you've had a whole ceremony where you're like, when is this over? I want this to end. Because that's a lesson. It's a huge lesson.
Yeah.
But I've had other experiences where I'm communicating with the trees. I'm communicating with nature. I've had very somatic experiences. I think because I'm a yogi and a dancer, and I'm very in my body. I'm very grounded. Mine is very somatic. Some people, they're just completely, they lay down and it's just all in their mind. Mine is like in my body the whole time. And I'm always very aware of where I am. I've never fully dissociated on ayahuasca. Like I know exactly where I am.
Yeah.
And who I am. Yeah, I've just had all kinds of crazy experiences. I think I knew this last trip to Peru. I knew, okay, I think I'm at the end of my relationship with Aya, because as people were sharing their stories, I'm like, oh yeah, I've had that. Oh yeah, I've had that. Not like I said that out loud or anything, but I'm just like, yep, gone through that.
Right.
You know, so it's like,
It
I
seems
feel like I've
you've
had the gamut. Yeah.
the full 360. Yeah.
There's always more to learn. Like I'm humble enough to know, there's a lot to learn. But maybe just for me personally, like she's kind of telling me, okay, maybe continue down the yogic path. That might be for you.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's other medicines out there calling to me.
How long does an ayahuasca session roughly last?
So I've had ceremonies that lasted into the next morning.
So that's more than 12 hours?
No, that would be like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay.
That's for me like the longest. And time is like iffy. It's like, okay, 8 hours in terms of what we've collectively decided is an hour. Like on ayahuasca, that might feel like 500 days.
Yeah.
So I've had times where I'm like, when is the sun gonna come? Like, comes up at like 6 a.m. every day. When is that gonna be? Because I'm like, okay, if I can just make it to sunrise, Tracy, just if you can just make it to sunrise, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. I've had other experiences where it was 3 hours and then it was done, and I'm like, whew, okie dokie. It depends on the tradition. Some places, after you have some familiarity with the medicine, they will offer you a second dose, maybe an hour and a half in. So keep in mind, since you're consuming ayahuasca, it has to go through your stomach. It's going through here. It's not immediate like an IV or a shot. It's taken orally. So it takes time for it to hit. And then she's also working through a lot of psychological barriers,
Yeah.
So you might not feel anything, and then all of a sudden you feel everything. And you're like, okay. I mean, I've had ceremonies where it was super mild the whole time, and I was secretly like, great, I love this. Like I did it, but I wasn't really challenged. Great. And then as soon as the shamans ended the ceremony, ayahuasca was like, we're here. And now I'm in like full blown
Oh, wow.
crazy town.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really weird how that happens sometimes.
Yeah. It also seems like you're somewhat strapped to the rocket ship when you take it. It's not really possible to get off once the journey starts.
Mm-mm. Many have tried.
Yeah.
Oh, I should mention too, I think in the Brazilian tradition, they drink in the daytime,
Okay.
which is like wild to me because ayahuasca heightens your senses so much. That's kind of why they do it at night, to just eliminate at least one of those senses, or
Yeah.
help you feel somewhat calm during it. But other lineages, other you know what should I say? Yeah, other lineages drink it during the daytime. And the shamanic training is so intense. The shamans I've worked with, I mean, it's basically like going to medical school and residency because it's about 10 years of study.
Wow.
And they usually start drinking when they're very young. And often, they do a time where they are just alone out in the jungle by themselves with the medicine, or they might be dieting a different plant that maybe is not as psychoactive, but they are building relationships with all these plants. And it's such an I love it because it's so different than our academic route of going and reading journal articles and what other people have studied and published in these institutions. The shamanic training is all internal.
Yeah.
It's all internal, and not everybody's going to make it. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah. What are some of the drawbacks of ayahuasca?
Well, it's not an instant fix, but nothing is, right? If you want to build muscle and you start working out, it's not going to be the next day all of a sudden you're like ripped.
Right.
So it's not a quick fix. It is physically challenging, physically very demanding. In addition to mentally, which people expect the mental hurdles, I think they might underestimate the physical nausea that happens going into the unknown, right? Versus I'm going to read this self-help book and I'm going to read this book and I'm going to work through the accompanying workbook and these exercises with my therapist. That's a little bit more known
and controlled, ordered.
controlled.
Yeah.
ordered. Like, okay, there's an end. The book has an end, right? There's no end with ayahuasca, you know? Like, as I've even said, I think I'm maybe done drinking, but like, she's certainly still with me. And it's always, if I go into other sacred spaces, I compare everything to ayahuasca.
Right.
So it's life altering. I feel like there's a big one that I'm probably not even thinking about. Let me think. Since I've had such a positive experience, let me remember people who've had negative experiences. Well, you might not feel anything.
Yeah.
That's a downside. I've seen people at the retreat center who come in, they've heard famous person talking about it, and then it just doesn't work for them. And that can be crushing. You know, they've taken all this time off work or whatever to go down to Peru or Ecuador or Colombia or Brazil, wherever they are, Costa Rica, all that investment, and then it's not working for them.
Right.
That is heartbreaking.
So we're almost at the end. The last question I had for you was, what would you change about the current perception of psychedelics or the culture around psychedelics?
Oh, the culture. I'd say the culture maybe. Yes, I would want the culture to be more inclusive and more welcoming of indigenous traditions, people who are familiar with these medicines and been working with them for thousands of years, who have in Peru, with Catholicism, tried to stamp this all out, right? It's like, no. So they have somehow managed to keep up these traditions, right? Despite, and actually it's interesting, they've kind of folded Catholicism into some of the ayahuasca ceremonies. Interesting from like a sociology point of view.
Yeah.
But anyways, I would just want to honor the teachers that have come before. This didn't start with maps.
Yeah.
Didn't start with Ram Dass and Timothy Leary at Harvard, right? It started, since the earth began.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I would want to bring to it and just honor those teachings. That doesn't mean that people who look like me can't do psychedelics. Certainly, I think that the medicine wants to spread and that it has something to teach us all, but you have to have reverence for where this all comes from.
So if people wanted to find you or get in contact with you, how would they go about doing that?
TracyCarver.com. TRACY. No E. Although I did buy Tracy Carver.
Just in case.
With the E, yeah. So actually, doesn't matter. You could spell Tracy however you want, and you will get to my website. Yeah, that's the best way.
Okay, perfect. Well, Tracy, I appreciate you coming here to talk to me about
it was a long walk.
All of these different areas that you have experienced. And I think people will get a lot of value from it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.